When I think of the phrase, what gets measured gets managed, the first thing that I think of is the monitoring and measuring requirements that are in the ISO 1345 standard. Of course, because I'm specializing in quality systems and implementation of ISO 1345. So that's all I have on my brain. But why is it so important to measure the process? In every process, does it say that you have to measure every single process? That's what we have in our procedures. Every single procedure has a section for what you monitor and measure for that process. But is it required? Well, technically, no. There are explicit requirements for monitoring and measuring processes, and there are explicit requirements for specific processes that must be measured, such as complaint handling, feedback, manufacturing processes. But not every single process has a requirement that you shall measure that process. Your company has to decide. But I thought it would be a lot easier and there would be a lot of benefits by making it mandatory to have a metric, at least one, required for every single procedure. So I put it right into our procedures right from the start when I wrote our first quality system procedure. So let's wind back a little bit and try to figure out why. But before I do that, I'm going to give you an example. It's not just it's not just measuring something, but you have to be measuring the right thing. I'll give you an example. We send out email blasts to companies. We have about 20,000 people that are on our email subscriber list. If we sent all 20,000 people an email every single time we wanted to send out an email blast, no matter what the topic was, we would have a lot of unsubscribers really fast and some very irritated people because we'd be just spamming them. They didn't all sign up for any topic. They signed up for specific topics, so they only want to get emails about that. And everybody has a tolerance. You get to a certain number of emails per month, and I'm going to cut you off and I'm going to unsubscribe, or I'm going to at least push them off to my spam folder so I don't have to look at them anymore. So, one of the things that we do is we not only measure the number of people that are the number of people that are receiving emails. So, how many email blasts did we send out this week? I don't just tell my employees, just send out as many email blasts as you can. But at the same time, we're also measuring the number of subscribers and trending that. So as long as the subscribers doesn't go down, or even better, goes up, we know that we're not spamming people. As long as we have one or two unsubscribes and we have more than that to replace it for new additions to our subscriber list, we're doing a fairly good job of only sending people content that they want. And they're voting by unsubscribing to us if we don't do that. So that's an example of it's not just measuring, give me a measurement. It's giving yourself the right measurement and making sure people can't game the system to try to make that number look really good in a negative way. But there were 5 reasons why I decided I really wanted to have a monitoring requirement in every single procedure. So I'll give you those 5 reasons. Number 1, there's a requirement for quality objectives to be established throughout the organization in all functions and all levels. Well, if you're going to try to establish quality objectives in every single department, and everybody should have a quality objective, every department should have one, every function should have one. If you already have metrics that you're gathering data for and you're doing a trend analysis of those, it's very easy to say, oh, let's make that one a quality objective. Not all of them are going to be quality objectives, but if you're already gathering the data, it's easy to set for top management to set a target and say, that's our quality objective for this process. Number 2, if I only required some of the procedures to have the requirement for monitoring, so only the absolute minimum, which is what most people would do, then people have to remember, is this a procedure that I have to monitor, or is this a procedure that I don't have to monitor? But if all the procedures require monitoring, then they know right up front, I have to monitor this procedure. What's the thing I'm going to be monitoring for this procedure? So when one person goes to a process that they may not be as familiar with, they go into a new apartment, they're filling a new department, or they're filling in for somebody that doesn't that isn't there right now and they don't normally do this job, it's much easier for them to say, okay, what does this person measure for this process, and make sure that monitoring stays up to date. Number three, there's the process approach to auditing. Whenever I teach auditing, I use the process approach instead of the element approach. Instead of saying, how do you meet clause 8.21? How do you meet 8.22? Show me where this is required because it's a regulatory requirement. Instead, we use the process approach. It's a 7-step approach. I'll actually provide a link down below. It's one of the ones I forgot to include. But for the process approach, you'll have first a description of the process, second, the inputs, third, the outputs, fourth, the resources in terms of equipment and calibrated materials and validated processes. The fifth step would be what resources in terms of people you'll have for the process. 6 will be what procedures and forms are required for it. And last, what metrics are you using for this process? And you need all 7 of those to do a thorough process approach to auditing. So if I automatically require process metrics for every process, we already have a metric for every procedure, so it's easier to do a process approach audit to every single procedure. Next, if you have a quantitative metric for every process, it's more likely that you'll be able to go back and gather quantitative data that very quickly to analyze what was the root cause for something that went wrong with that process. But if you don't keep any metrics, then you have to go back and gather the metrics retroactively or start gathering them now, and that could delay your ability to determine what the root cause is for any kind of a quality issue you're having. So if you already have the data, it puts you in a much better position to do the analysis quickly, efficiently, and implement a corrective action. In addition to being able to do the root cause analysis, I also want to be able to set what should be an effectiveness criteria. So if normally we're performing at, let's say, 95% yield on a process, and it suddenly dropped to 70%, that helps me identify the root cause. But the effectiveness check would be at least getting it back up to the 95% mark. So having a baseline of where you were can tell you whether you need to go higher than that or at least up to that level to establish a quantitative effectiveness check. That's useful if your CAPA plan is going to use a validation report for your effectiveness or whether it's going to be some other method. But whenever you have quantitative effectiveness checks, those are much better than if you don't. And we put a link down below for an article that talks about quantitative effectiveness checks for CAPAs. And the last reason is preventive actions. Preventive actions are really hard for companies to come up with. They shouldn't be. It should be very easy to brainstorm what could go wrong and come up with a plan for it before it actually happens. But people don't do that. People are always in reactive mode and trying to fix a problem that just occurred rather than preventing problems. So that's the whole point of having a preventive action clause in the standard, but people don't do it. And I found over time the best source of preventive actions is monitoring and measuring of processes. When you see the data doesn't look as good as you want it to be, it's very easy to implement a preventive action for that. Whereas if you don't have any metrics, you're missing out on a lot of potential preventive actions for your process. So I've actually included a graph that shows you an example of how you can use data from a process, monitoring data from a run chart, and determine, oh, this process does not look like it's can control as tightly as it should be. The CPK or process capability is not where I want it to be. If I make an adjustment in the parameters, I'll bring down into more the middle of the process control chart, and it will be much higher process capability number, and that's what I'm looking for. So I've actually provided that graph in this diagram or in this blog that we're going to post this for. I hope that helps you understand what the 5 reasons are for why we want to have a process metric for every single procedure. Number 1, we want to make it easier for you to establish quality objectives. Number 2, it's easier to remember that you have to do it if you have to do it for all the procedures instead of some of the procedures. It facilitates the process approach to auditing. It also establishes a baseline for quantitative effectiveness checks and facilitates root cause analysis. And last but not least, it's the best source of preventive actions. I hope that's helpful. And if you have any other questions, follow the link down below for scheduling an appointment with me. Have a great day. Bye bye.